All right, welcome everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. Is Brian back there? Brian, are you good to go? He's good to go. This is meeting number 3 of our community meeting regarding public employee pensions and whatnot. My name's Sean Harris, Mayor, and this is Councilman Dave Shaw next to me. If we can please all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. We have a good, very informative presentation this evening, followed by discussion as always. And I'd like to introduce Robin Bertagna, our Finance Director.
Good evening, everybody. We're very, very fortunate tonight to have a guest speaker who's extremely knowledgeable and very well informed as it relates to the issues of CalPERS and unfunded pension liabilities. With that, first I will lead off by reading a portion of his bio and then introduce him so he can come and give you about an hour-long presentation and answer your questions. Dane Hutchings, for over a decade, has been advocating for the best interests of both public and private entities. He is a seasoned legislative advocate and political strategist with a keen understanding of the California political process and landscape. Regarded as a statewide thought leader in California public pension policy, Mr. Hutchings brings a unique understanding of California local government operations, service delivery methods, and revenue sources. Mr. Hutchings most recently worked for the League of California Cities as the legislative representative and federal policy liaison. He acted as the key strategist, advisor, and advocate in issue areas including California Public Employees Retirement System CalPERS, labor relations policies, healthcare, elections, California Voting Rights Act, California Public Records Act, and other issues related to local government operations. An expert in public pension policy, Mr. Hutchings provides policy briefings to local governments, labor groups, business groups, and local chambers of commerce on public pension policy. Upon his departure from the League, Mr. Hutchings received a Career Achievement Award for his leadership, dedication, and tenacity in advancing the quality of life for all California cities. With that, I would like to welcome Dane to come up and give us his presentation on public pensions. Thank you very much, Dane, for being here.
Absolutely. Good evening, everybody. As Robin said, my name is Dane Hutchings. I am the Director of Government Affairs with the Rennie Public Policy Group. We're a law firm and lobby firm out in San Francisco and also in Sacramento. I still represent the League of California Cities on contract and a variety of other public sector clients. I wanted to really just kind of get into a couple of issues. We talk a lot about, from a public perception standpoint, folks that live in our cities there's a lot of issues that we need to tackle. We've got affordable housing issues, homelessness issues. There's a host of things that really rise to the top, and really my, of course, somewhat partial explanation or response to that is, well, we have to try to work together and find a way to tackle really one of the biggest issues that's facing local government, and that's rising unfunded pension liabilities. Because until we can really tackle this issue and understand this issue, it's very difficult to try and attack some of the other issues that that plague some of our local agencies. And so, kind of get in. Here's a little run of show. And by the way, I promise I won't talk for a full hour. I certainly will allow, permit time for questions. And I really I want to share kind of a wraparound, 30,000 foot issue of what's going on in the pension world. But then I want to have a discussion and of course answer your questions. But a couple of things we're going to be talking about today. Really, why cities specifically are what we kind of dub as being on the front lines of the pension issue, more so than counties, special districts, or other local government agencies, including especially more so than the state of California. Going to want to go over a couple of different kind of CalPERS 101 terms that, I'm going to be using these sort of buzzwords a lot, so I figured I'd maybe kind of break down what some of those mean. And then, when we talk about the challenges ahead, looking really at fiscal year 24-25, but more so, I would assume maybe even a little bit sooner than that. Why, really the big fiscal challenges ahead in the next couple of years, and sort of a kind of a recipe of things happening that's going to drive some of these issues. I want to talk a little bit about a study that the League of California Cities released, and then talk a little bit about sort of the political realities in Sacramento, why it isn't as cut and dry as saying, well, why don't we just do X, Y, and Z? I can kind of break down that for you, and then kind of look a little bit further about what does the future hold as far as legislative trends and trends that are happening at the CalPERS board. So really, why are cities on the front lines? Cities provide the most direct public services. They have the most employees and the highest level of payroll. Most cities, 2/3 of their entire general fund budget or more are dedicated solely to just having employees to provide these services. When you look at police, fire, municipal employees, we turn on our water, the water comes out, someone's got to be able to make sure the water comes on, right? And the trash is getting taken out. So, we provide the most direct services, but yet received little to no direct funding from the state. We had redevelopment for a while, it's gone away. We get a sliver of property taxes, and so we don't have as much revenue, not to mention the fact that as we look from a more broader perspective, you look at the challenges ahead with regards to e-commerce. I mean, people aren't shopping in brick and mortar anymore. A major revenue source for cities is sales tax revenue. We're just not seeing as much of that anymore because it's very convenient to order something online, and we haven't really figured out the whole sales allocation issue yet in California. And frankly, regional pressures to attract talent. Every time I, talk to a city manager or HR director, they say, look, if we are the first ones to sort of step out and say, yes, we want to make that, we're going to, modify our formulas, or we're going to adopt another tier, they have this, fear that is rightfully so, that folks are going to say, well, look, I'm going to go to the neighboring city that isn't going to, it's going to pay me more. It's going to give me a better benefit. Just like, we are subject to the market forces like anyone else. The only difference is we can't unilaterally just raise revenues like a private company can. For cities, it's, I look at it, and we'll get into this a little bit more as we dig into the presentation. Overall general fund budget, as far as what your minimum pension payment is, versus really where the state is and what their general fund budget is. And so when you look at a whole pie here and say, okay, how much money is going to be going to payroll, operations, and then how much money is going to be going directly to PERS. You pair those to maybe what's happening at the state or the county level. The issues are really significant. And and finally, don't know what happened there. There we go. And finally, for cities, it's not about, year 30. It's about today and the next 10 years. And I think I say that because whenever you talk to the folks at PERS and you interact with the people at PERS, the first thing they say is we're a long-term investor. We're not worried about 1 year over the next year because we're thinking about 30 years out from now what our average return on investment is going to be. Well, quite frankly, cities can't wait 30 years. We've got to do something now because we are on the front lines. We're going to be the first ones to see as rising unfunded liabilities continue to crowd out public services. So the first thing I kind of want to go over is what CalPERS refers to as the pension buck. And I should also say too that all the data points, all of the numbers I have in this presentation come directly from CalPERS agency. And so I know a lot of times you say, well, if you talk to a private consultant, they're going to give you numbers that look way scarier than they are. We were conscious about that when we worked at the League of Cities to say, look, we're going to trust the state agency's data and go off that, even though a lot of folks will tell you that they think that their data is a little bit more optimistic than what it is. But suffice it to say, everything you see in this presentation comes directly from CalPERS' data directly. So when you look at this is actually a graphic from CalPERS. It's the CalPERS pension buck, meaning that every dollar that is paid to a retiree once they've pulled their papers, this is how that funding is broken down. So for every dollar, 59 cents of that dollar comes from investment returns from CalPERS. 28 cents of it comes from the employer, and 13 cents of it comes from the employee. Now, this breakdown does not include if your local agency has negotiated that the employees pay part of the employer share. So I certainly want to give credit where credit is due. If the employees are thrown towards the employer share, this doesn't take into account. Also, what this doesn't take into account, though, is that when CalPERS does not meet their rate of return, it is the employer that picks up that extra cost. The employer is the insurer of the benefits. So this 59 cents on the dollar is predicated on CalPERS earning 7% each and every year on their investments. And so, right, that's what we call the discount rate. So the discount rate is the minimum amount that CalPERS must earn each year to ensure that this dollar amount is actually being broken down accordingly. So for example, this year CalPERS earned 6.7%, not 7%. So that 30 basis points or 0.3% doesn't sound like a lot. It's very, very significant. And all of that was pushed over to the employer share. It doesn't get moved over to the employee share because that 13 cents is fixed in statute. So on the employee side, we just can't go any higher than 13 cents. A couple other things you're going to be hearing from me today is something called, we talk about the PERF. And what the PERF is, it is the big CalPERS pension fund, okay? So CalPERS itself, the agency, there's 3,000 employers or 2,800 or so employers in the system. Everyone throws in contributions each and every year, and those contributions are pooled into what they call the Public Employees Retirement Fund, or the PERF. That's the big fund that everyone talks about when they say the CalPERS fund has $348 billion in it. That's the PERF. CalPERS also runs several other funds, closed funds like the Judges Retirement System. They run something called the TAP, which we'll talk about a little bit later. They manage several different funds, but the one that everyone talks about that's always in the papers is the PERF. Amortization. Amortization is really a fancy way of saying like that. Those are essentially like your loan terms. When you look at it is the amount of time that either gains or losses that PERS generates each and every year is spread out over time. So for the longest time, really after the Great Recession, CalPERS said, okay, we got to take a step back here. For now on, we're going to spread out what everyone owes over 30 years of time rather than what is traditionally accepted in the actuarial community being about 15 to 20 years. And so, what does that do? Well, it makes our payments smaller, but unfortunately in the actuarial world, the first 12 years that we make those payments on a 30-year cycle, we're not even actually taking all of the interest into account. It takes 12 years of making the minimum payment until you even start chopping into principal. And so those liabilities continue to grow year after year. So what CalPERS did in February of 2018 was they said, okay, everything that's happened up until now is going to stay on 30 years. But moving forward, any gains or losses that are going to happen are going to be spread out over 20 years. Well, in other words, what happens when we take a 30-year mortgage and we shorten it to 20 years? Payments are going to go up, right? And so what happens if CalPERS doesn't earn what they're supposed to earn? Those losses are going to be spread out over a shorter period of time as opposed to being spread out over a longer period of time. And we'll get into it a little bit later, but CalPERS is expected to earn below what they say they are going to earn for the next decade. Actuarial assumptions. These are mathematical and statistical assumptions on a variety of information that dictate how much we pay. So we talk about the number of full-time employees in an agency. The life expectancy of retirees once they retire. What do we think the market is actually going to give us in return on these investments? These are all things that the actuaries at CalPERS go taking into all of these accounts. This is how much you're going to now have to pay. And they do that year after year. And then finally, the terminated agency pool. I just want to spend a little bit more time on this one just for a second because it is very scary and it is something that, I want to be direct about as far as some of the implications of the TAP fund. So what the TAP fund is, it is what they refer to as the terminated agency pool, meaning that we talked about the PERF, which is the fund that everyone's money is invested in and pooled in. So money is going into that fund every year. It's being invested and those returns are being realized. In the TAP fund, it's the place where if an agency decides, hey, we want out of PERS and we're done, and they can afford it and they can pay the full freight that it costs to get out of PERS, the PERS will say, okay, we'll take that money, we'll move you into the TAP fund. You no longer have to make payments. We're going to take it from here. So no more contributions are going into the TAP fund. But what we've seen happen is when payments become so high that even the minimum payment on that mortgage becomes so high that they can't even make those payments, CalPERS will involuntarily terminate those agencies and move them from the PERF and throw them into the TAP fund. And unfortunately, what happens in that scenario is that we talk about, the PERF and the discount rate, okay? So, if we go to your agency and say, how much are you funded? And most agencies, cities are going to say, I'm probably in the 60% funded, meaning I have 60 cents on the dollar that I owe retirees that I have cash on hand. And that's based on if CalPERS earns 7% every year. But if CalPERS puts you in the TAP fund, they're going to say, well, because no more money is coming in, we have to be ultra conservative. And so we're going to assess it at a 3% rate of return. The problem with that is that when you look at an agency that's 60% funded based on 7% and you throw them into the TAP fund at 3%, the liabilities skyrocket. And so the only way to make that whole for CalPERS is they say, okay, if you're going to go in the TAP fund and you can't afford to pay your way out of it, we have to reduce the retiree's benefit by whatever that percentage is to ensure that the TAP fund stays whole and the fund can continue to operate. So the most, this has happened in several agencies across California, very, very small agencies that you probably have never heard of, but the one that probably got the most attention was last year down in Southern California. It was an authority called LA Works, where there was where the unfunded liability was about $12 million, and the agency had no more money coming into it. And so what happened is they were moved into the TAP fund. The retirees, there was 167 retirees that saw a 67% reduction in their benefit. So could you imagine working for your agency for 30 years, 25 years, putting in this time, making your contributions, doing your fair share, the agency simply can no longer make the payment, and you get a letter in the mail from PERS saying, we're sorry, but we're reducing your pension benefit by 70%. I mean, it is the absolute worst case scenario, but unfortunately, it's what we have seen happen thus far, and if we can't work together, it's going to be a challenge to see that more agencies are going to be going into the TAP fund. In fact, just this week at the CalPERS board meeting, they did an annual assessment of the TAP fund, and the chief actuary predicted that there's going to be several agencies that are going to be moving into the TAP fund. It really is the worst case scenario. This is my best shot at actually creating a graphic. Again, I use CalPERS's data. I just sort of try to repurpose it in an Excel sheet. But this sort of illustrates why, in our opinion, fiscal year 24-25 is really going to be a really challenging year. Is that what CalPERS did in 2016 was they reduced that rate of return, okay? So they went from saying, okay, we're at a 7.50 rate of return. That's how much we think we're going to get each and every year. We're lowering that down to 7%. And so, but they lowered it in a way that phases it in over time to try to give a little bit so your contributions just aren't skyrocketing out of nowhere. So they're phasing it in. So we're going to see the full phase in of this reduction in the discount rate by fiscal year 24-25, which means contributions are going to go up. At the same time, you talk to any economist or anyone who says, we can't go on this economic run up forever. You look at that, so you've got the discount rate reduction, plus you've got sub-market returns or returns that are below what they are projecting. Plus now we've shortened that time period over 20 years as opposed to 30 years. And so now we're taking these losses and spreading out over a shorter period of time, which is a spike in contribution rates, which is a reduction in public services. And you kind of have this perfect storm of a lot of folks being in some trouble when we're talking about, the fiscal solvency of a lot of local public agencies. So, one of the things that the League of Cities did, during my time there, is they wanted to try and really draw, a line in the sand to say, look, if 85% of Californians live in cities, we have to make it very clear that cities are really on the front lines, that they're the ones who are really going to be the ones, really owning the brunt of what's to come. We need to be able to get all the data that CalPERS has, and they'll give you a 3,000-page report with all these numbers. We want to be able to pull the ones that are just specific to cities, and we want to be able to tell that story. And so what this survey did was a couple of things. One, it took directly from CalPERS. Every single city, there's 455 cities in the CalPERS fund, took all of their payroll data that these cities have to report to PERS. And so that was very easy to get. The other half That was to establish a percentage of payroll. So we can say, okay, how much are contributions going to increase over time as a percentage of a payroll for every single city? They broke it out by miscellaneous employees and public safety. And then we surveyed our own membership and said, okay, we want to know that same exact data, but what does it mean for your entire general fund budget? And so we had 196 valid responses. They pulled in the data. We used an actuarial firm to take all of their data, crunch the numbers, and then release the study. So here's a couple of those key findings that it will, pretty interesting to see. And by the way, this is, again, all of this data is based on what CalPERS assumes. So no funny math here. We're using their formulas. So on average, in fiscal year 2017-2018, on average, cities by county, so we just broke it out by county, but it's the cities within those counties, average percentage of general fund budget, meaning the employer's share to PERS, that does not include healthcare, doesn't include payroll or anything else, the minimum payment they're making to PERS is somewhere around 12.5% to 15% of your general fund budget. And then we move forward when we project out with those actuarial assumptions, what the market's going to give, how long people are living, all that fun stuff. You look at what we're looking at by fiscal year 24-25, and you've got most of the state that's going to be spending north of 15%, closer to 18% of their entire general fund budget going towards PERS minimum payment, with 10% of cities spending 21% or more of their entire general fund on the minimum payment to CalPERS. Again, doesn't include any healthcare payment, doesn't include payroll for your staff or any sort of operations. Just think 21% off the top of your general fund budget going to PERS, just to make the very minimum payment. And so when we look at this, the reason why this is all colored up all the way through is because this is directly, we didn't have to survey our members, this is just coming directly from the agency. And so when you look at projected rates for miscellaneous employees, it is projected that you're looking at by fiscal year 24-25, a majority of cities their contributions will increase by about 30% more than what they're paying today. So if right now as a percentage of payroll, I'm paying, 35% of my, right off the top has to go to PERS as a percentage of my payroll, by fiscal year 24-25, on the low end, that's going to be about 30% more. On the high end, that's going to be a little over 50%. And so you look at that and go, okay, well, if I've got, I'm making this number up, but if I got $1 million sitting in an account right now that money is allocated to pay employees and pay PERS, $350,000 of that as of today is going to go to PERS. Now, by fiscal year 24-25, we're thinking that, 65% of that or 85% of that is now going to go to PERS, leaving you with 15% left to pay your employees. I mean, that is right there. I mean, that's one of those issues we think, oh, okay, how do we crack this nut? How do we figure this out? But it is something that is certainly, happening, virtually every public agency statewide or every city statewide. For public safety, it's a little bit higher. The colors look the same, but the corresponding numbers are a little bit different. And that's because the benefit formulas for public safety are slightly higher, a little bit more generous than it is for miscellaneous employees. And so when we look at the same exact numbers, according to PERS, is that by fiscal year 24-25, contributions will rise by a minimum of 51%, but depending on the structural health of the city, could actually increase by over 91%. So again, the same number, we got $1 million in a pot. Today, right now, we've got 30% of that's going to PERS. Now, on the minimum, you're going to see a 51% increase. So then, okay, now 81% of our dollars that that's there to try to pay the employees and increase operations is now going to PERS, with some of the cities going up to 91%. So now there's a math problem, right? Right now we got 30%. Now we're going to throw 91% on top. That's 121%. But we only have one pie. So again, we've got to figure out this way, how do we, and that's by fiscal year 24-25. That's also assuming that CalPERS earns 7% every year, which they're not going to. So another big issue that we have to face is, the way a pension system operates is you have to have people in the system paying into the system in order for the retirees to be able to ensure that they're getting their dollars. Well, as contributions rise, it's sort of this circular issue that we're having, because as contributions rise, we have less money on the table. We have to lay folks off. And so we lay folks off, or at least at the very least hiring freezes. We're not bringing more folks in. So as contributions rise, we can't have people aren't paying into the system. We have to lay people off, which means that contributions rise again. And this is a significant challenge. So according to CalPERS, in 2001, there were about 2 active workers working and paying into the system for every 1 retiree. By 2017, there was about 1.25 workers in the system paying into the system for every 1 retiree. And it's projected within the next 10 to 20 years that there will be about a half a worker paying into the system for every 1 retiree. That is a challenge. We have to have more folks paying into the system to ensure that folks that are retired are continuing to receive their benefits. One of the issues that this one I can touch over really quickly, but one of the issues that I just found interesting is that there was a recent PPIC poll, Public Policy Institute of California, bipartisan think tank that releases numbers of regards to public policy every single year. And so in March of 19, they released their sort of state of the state poll results, and one of the questions I was asked is about what do you, to the public, what do you think about public pensions? Well, 69% of likely voters feel that, about 34% of them feel like that's a big problem, 35% think it's somewhat of a problem. And ironically, even though 69% you go, whoa, those are really favorable numbers, if you look at historically, it's actually historically low since 2005. So despite the fact that pensions are becoming a bigger and bigger issue, the public isn't really, they're not as engaged as they were, say, during the Great Recession. And part of that really has to do with the fact that when you look at what's happening in California right now, it's very much focused on housing production, homelessness issues, things of that, environmental issues, things that are of course very laudable and things that the legislature should be discussing and debating, but it's driving the narrative sort of away from this really big problem that we have to kind of wrap our heads around. How are we going to fix this? So, we talk about, kind of the political realities, as it were. What are the things that are challenging to try to just address this issue? Because I get a lot of times when folks say, okay, well, you've outlined all these problems, and what can we do about it? Right now in this current environment, there's not a ton that we can do unless we get some help. And there's a couple of reasons why. And so, currently, we use the term political will as a buzzword to basically say our state elected's going to have the guts to go out on a vote that's going to maybe make some people mad. And right now, it's a resounding no. Our state and actually, I would rephrase to say that the folks that representing Nielsen and Gallagher actually probably would perhaps maybe weigh in on something like that. But again, it's a tough vote, right? But suffice it to say, it's very, very limited political will to want to do something because it isn't on fire yet, and that's pun intended. But it just right now, housing is the shiny object, and I say that not disparagingly because again, housing, homelessness, big issues. We saw hundreds of housing bills this year, and it really became the fodder of discussion, especially this year and also last year. But that is really what's driving the narrative and the policy debate is all the stuff. It's housing, it's environmental, and it's anything that's anti-Trump. That's just straight up. That's what's happening right now. It's California versus Washington D.C. and it's these other issues that are happening in California, and people aren't really talking about this 800-pound gorilla that's just waiting there. There is pending litigation in vested rights cases, and so people will say, well, what are vested rights? I'm sure everyone in this room knows. But vested rights are it's a legal term that says that it was established through legal precedent that says once you've agreed to a set of pensionable compensation, and once you've been agreed to that, it's covered under the contracts clause of the Constitution, and therefore you cannot touch anything, you can't make any sort of adjustments to a pension formula, and so and because that's really where the courts have landed as of late. The state lawmakers go, well, the courts have ruled on this, and we really don't want to tinker with what the courts have to say. It's interesting because if you look at the big conversation this year around Assembly Bill 5, they were certainly taking on what the courts had to say and wanted to codify some language. But suffice it to say, on this particular subject, state lawmakers like to say, well, the courts haven't really settled on all this stuff yet, so we're just going to take a back seat on it. The problem is it could take multiple years for the courts to really remedy some of these issues with regards to what's a vested right and what isn't a vested right, what's a pensionable benefit and what isn't a pensionable benefit. And all the while, we've got this really short timeline specifically for cities that we need action now. We can't wait a decade for the courts to figure it out. It's also, look, this is a very politically charged issue. I mean, statewide, you've got statewide public sector unions, you've got retiree groups, you've got local government like us saying we need to do something. You have taxpayer groups that a lot of them, by and large, the rationale as well. Private sector got out of the pension business a long time ago. So does public sector. Personally, the League of Cities is a very pro-defined benefit organization, as are my clients that I represent. We certainly want to see the pension system survive and thrive. You have chambers of commerce that say, well, look, what happens when if local governments are in trouble and they have to raise revenues, what's that going to do to my business? We certainly want to have a voice in this discussion. And of course, you have a little known term called placement agents. It's folks that are investors that are trying to court CalPERS and say you should invest in our fund or invest in my fund, and they have their own skin in the game as far as where for their own clients. And so there's and that's just to name a few. And there's a lot of different people that all want different things coming from what some sort of resolution that's going to come out of all of this. And from the, I'm not here in my capacity as working with the League of Cities, but I can tell you that one of the things that we've continued to preach at the League is that we all need to sit in a room and figure this out together. And try to find a collaborative way to address some of these fundamental issues, because it's very easy for state lawmakers to sit back and relax if we're not unified in saying we need something. It's very easy for them to take a back seat and focus on other issues. I think two very big misconceptions as well, really in Sacramento and California politics, are two things. Number one, that when pension reform was passed in 2012, that fixed all the problems. So when PEPRA, the Public Employees Pension Reform Act, was passed, they go, well, that fixed all. We took care of that in 2012. We're in good shape. Well, not really. And here's the reason why: is because you have classic members who have very generous pension formulas who are, when they passed PEPRA, it didn't modify them. It was only for brand new hires after 2013. And so all of these hires coming in now are on different formulas, and those formulas are balanced. They would, if you were just to look at PEPRA formulas, they pencil out. The problem is that the only way for us to see cost savings is about 30 to 45 years from now, when the majority of classic members are no longer drawing benefits. You can read between the lines on what that means. You have, and when PEPRA members are retiring, that's when you're going to see some of the cost savings. But that's, again, 30 years from now, and we've got to fix stuff going on the next 5 to 10 years. Oh, yes, and the last one, the state is doing well. That means that the locals are doing well too. And one of the big again misconceptions is that we look at one of our very first slides about revenue sources, right? So you look at the state of California. I mean, they're doing pretty phenomenal. They got Silicon Valley tax revenues coming in all day. They're doing okay. So I did this presentation for some folks earlier today, and I posed the question to say, we talked a little bit earlier about, we go back to, let's say, this slide here, we say, majority of cities are going to be spending 18% of their general fund budget, with some of them spending north of 21% of their general fund budget on the minimum PERS payment. So does, a little audience interaction here, does anyone have a guess on what the state's portion of their general fund budget, when you talk about their payment to PERS? Anything? Nope, nothing? Okay. 5%. Close. That was actually close. So it's actually 6.1%, and that actually includes PERS, STRS, UC system, and it includes all of the healthcare costs associated with those. All of that together is about 6.1%, 6.2% of their entire general fund. When you look at where cities are, 18 to 21 or more is just for PERS employers portion alone. So I mean, so when I'm walking the halls of the Capitol and I'm talking to lawmakers about this stuff, I go, look, the state is doing okay. They just threw down in the last 2 years, they've made $9 billion in additional payments. So the state is doing just fine. But the way the fund is structured, we talked about earlier, all of our investments are pooled together, right? But every single agency has their own individual funded status. So if an agency can't keep up, they get moved into the TAP, which is the worst case scenario. But the state is making all these payments and they're doing okay. And so that to me is one of the biggest misconceptions, which is why I'm talking to, I've had the opportunity to brief dozens of bargaining units across the state, and locally, almost resoundingly, they get it. They go, okay, well, I do have a harder challenge kind of getting that same, like, we acknowledge and understand and get it from sort of the state guys up top, right? And so the call to action that the state labor guys gave me was, well, when we hear it from our members, then we'll come to the table. So my call to action to every time I talk to, whether it's a group of bargaining units or the public, say, well, get these guys to the table so we can figure out a way to get through this together. So, again, what can cities do today? Under current law, really the toughest decisions are going to be made locally because of those things we talked about. The courts haven't ruled. We don't have any guidance from the state to give us some more tools and abilities to be able to make this work. And so that means we've got to bargain it locally. We have to perhaps identify, new sources of revenue. And I think the challenge is that the cities that are going to get hit the hardest, and tell me if this sounds familiar, it's rural cities that are mature, that have a dwindling tax base, and that don't have the political will locally to raise revenues. And that to me is a challenge because, you can have the most fiscally, conservative and a very incredibly good steward of taxpayer dollars right here in your local government. But as these contributions continue to rise and rise and rise, they only have one pie. And if there's no extra revenue coming in to try and provide other services, there's really nothing else that we can do until we can, again, come together collaboratively and work on this together at a statewide level. Another issue is, reducing active employee health care or plan benefits on OPEB. Healthcare is something that as of now, it has been clear. The courts have said you can do whatever you want on healthcare costs. On the pension stuff, it's a little bit murky, but on the healthcare side, you can do a little bit of everything. And we've seen, when we've seen municipal bankruptcies, they have yet to pull the trigger on reducing pensions, but we have seen them eliminate healthcare to offset because they've got to come, the bankruptcy judge is saying you got to do something. And so they've got to figure out something to make some hard decisions. Certainly not encouraging folks to go into bankruptcy, but that's just what we've seen in the past. Establishing a 115 trust, which I know that Yuba City has a 115 trust, where you guys have your own capital where you're investing, and then when contributions begin to really start ticking up and rising, you can grab money from that trust to try to stabilize those payments a little bit, make sure that your budgets aren't going completely out of whack, which is good. You can reduce your amortization period from 20 years to 15 years, but not a lot of people are doing that these days because what happens when you take a 20-year mortgage and cut it down to 15 years? Payment's going to go up. So it's going to mean that your payment's going to go up right away. But if you can just ride the storm out, you're going to get through it a heck of a lot quicker if you shorten it down to 15. And then last but not least is saying, really you can issue out a pension obligation bond. But again, I am not a financial expert. But the folks at GFOA and I always forget the second one. CSFMO, California State Municipal Finance Officers, and all of these, the finance directors, locally, statewide, and nationwide, all strongly oppose pension obligation bonds because what happens is you issue out a bond. And, you don't issue out a secure bond like you would for infrastructure because you have collateral there and you're generating revenue. You're basically taking out a credit card saying we're going to take our debt, we're going to throw it on this credit card, and we're going to put it out there for a 30 or 40-year term. Well, when the market eventually comes back to earth, what happens to bond rates? They go up. And so now not only is your unfunded liability growing still with PERS, now you got a credit card that's got an interest rate that's climbing. So you've just multiplied your problem by issuing out a POB. I will say there have been some agencies that have timed the market right, and they got frankly they got lucky and they were able to kind of navigate out. But I would suggest rolling the dice at Vegas before you issue a POB. But I'm not an expert. So look, there was a bunch of different legislation that got introduced this year that were significantly going to drive up cost for the employer. I think I'll just touch on a couple of these ones. Really AB 33 and AB 1320, AB 1332. These are all measures that would have mandated that the pension fund divest from profitable industries to try and send a political signal to whatever the interest group that they wanted to divest from. So, for example, Assembly Bill 1320 is a bill by an assembly member out of Los Angeles who says that the CalPERS fund should divest from the government of Turkey until such time as the Turkish government publicly acknowledges the Armenian genocide. Now, I am not, geo-national politics is not my thing, but one would surmise that if the government of Turkey has denied the Armenian genocide for over 100 years, CalPERS divesting their $1 billion of profitable interest in that government is not going to be the tipping point for them to publicly acknowledge it, yet the fund's going to lose $1 billion. Divestment has cost the pension fund $10 billion thus far. They've divested from tobacco, which was significantly expensive for them. There has been pushes for the legislature to introduce measures that have them divest from the Dakota Access Pipeline, which would have included all the major banks that invested into the Dakota Access Pipeline, would have been hundreds of billions of dollars. There's movements to divest from Trump's border wall. There's movements to divest from private prisons. There's movements to divest from, anything under the sun. There's a lawmaker that has introduced legislation that has said that we must divest from X, Y, or Z. Yeah. That's actually what we like to call a friendly amendment. I suggest that at every single time a divestment bill comes. I said, look, we're happy to support this measure if you're willing to let the general fund ensure that any loss incurred by such divestment would be insured. And the authors have not been privy to take me up on those amendments. But I will say that the state legislature is, I think, finally starting to wise up a little bit as far as the PERS committees. They make divestment very, very difficult for it to happen. And I think, quite frankly, it was because it's been a large influx of folks. It's actually the one issue in the pension world where I can go right up there with the lobbyists from the California Professional Firefighters or PORAC or SEIU. We kind of join in together and we both say, we don't want this. Stop telling PERS what they can and can't invest in. So that is, it's a start. We've got one thing that we have a comment on this issue, and we do a pretty good job at killing these bills. 1320, just as an FYI, there was an amendment that was placed into the bill that says it'll only become effective if the United States government places formal sanctions on Turkey, which, since we have a massive Air Force base there and a big presence, I don't think that's going to happen very often. So although it's likely going to be signed by Governor Newsom, it's symbolic at best. But even so, we still oppose it. We're asking for a veto on that bill because we have to have a hard line on divestment. So, look, we look at kind of, okay, what's the future hold, okay? So we look at, legislative trends. So we've got, lawmakers are going to continue to introduce measures that impede CalPERS' ability to hit their investment returns. So that's your divestment measures. You're going to be seeing more, benefit enhancement measures. We've got a brand new governor. We want to see if he's willing to, do one thing or another to help out his buddies. But thus far, I'll tell you, this year he's been pretty fiscally sound on a lot of these measures. You're going to see measures that are going to prohibit local governments from being able to contract out for anything. And again, when I say contract, I don't mean actively displacing workers. What we mean is contracting out for specialized skill positions or seasonal positions that you have some of the statewide groups that really want to turn those into rank and file positions that are paid for by local governments. And also we've seen a couple of reserve cap measures. And what I mean by reserve cap is that there was a bill that was passed a couple of years ago that put a cap on what school districts were allowed to save. So if you had a robustful year, you had some money set aside, the law has said that you can only have a certain percentage over in your reserves. The problem with that now is when we're hitting the Great Recession, and now when we have liabilities that are skyrocketing, there's no money to pull anymore to pay these liabilities because there's no reserves. And so you see, the city of Sacramento Unified School District is in big trouble. And I mean, if you read the SACB and you kind of follow what's going on there, they're close to going bankrupt because they have no money in their reserves because they had a cap. And so we saw a bill earlier this year that would have required all local agencies to have reserve caps. We were able to get that stopped really, really early. And hopefully we don't see that again, but something tells me we might. And then when you think about the CalPERS Board of Administration, some of the things that are happening around there, look, their outside investment firm, Wilshire, has said over the next 10 years, CalPERS is expected to earn 6.2%. So their own people are saying for the next decade, they're going to earn less than 7%. So when we looked at all those numbers, about $91 additional, that's all based on 7%. But their own people are saying they're going to earn 6%. Granted, they say, well, then, in year 20, from years 10 to 30, we're going to earn 8%, which means that over 30 years, we're going to average 7%. But right now, we can't really be focused on what's happening 30 years from now. We got to figure out what's happening now. So for the next decade, we've got 6.2% spread out over only 20 years as opposed to 30. You're going to see higher contributions because of those lagging returns. We're going to continue to see, CalPERS increased employer audits, something that a lot of local governments are facing right now. You're going to get a friendly letter from PERS saying, hey, we want to look at all your finances and you've got to comply. You've got a major ramp up on from CalPERS saying, well, what's a common law employee versus a independent contractor? I'm not saying what their motives are. All I'm saying is that if the numbers are saying that we have a half a worker for every retiree, wouldn't it be incumbent upon me to try to make as many people workers as possible to bring them in the system? That's just me saying that. The CalPERS Board of Administration, there's been significant turnover in the last 18 months, but it also presents a good opportunity for us to continue to engage and educate them and say, hey, we've got to come together and work together to solve some of these issues. One thing that is a positive note is that the new board members have been laser focused on returns, have put their fists down when it says, we cannot have any divestment bills. Just this week, we had, I want to say maybe 20 folks from the California Faculty Association urged the CalPERS board to divest. And if this was 2 years ago, they probably would have. This year, they just said, thank you for your comment, and they just let them go on their way. So CalPERS is acknowledging that the benefits are as secure as the employer's ability to pay them. And by divesting from industries that are profitable, it's going to make it that much harder for the employer to pay the benefits. So with that, I'm happy at this point to take some questions, and thank you for your attention and the time. Thanks.
I have a question.
Sure.
Who do you recommend to vote for the CalPERS board now, because there are people running?
That's a great question. I'm in a weird position where I really can't provide a personal endorsement in that race. I would say read your voter guide and make an educated decision. That's how I would answer that one.
There's sure a lot of attacking on one particular, and it's being attacked by the union. That's bothersome.
That. Yes, that's true. That is very true. Maybe we can have that. We can answer that question over a beer one day. But but for now I'll have to. Yeah, I'll take wine. Yeah.
All right,
Excuse me.
Dane.
I was going to say, if you have any questions to ask, can you speak into the microphone so we can record it?
Dane, I'm going to ask you some questions. I'm a financial planner and everything myself, and so I deal with this in the real world, the normal world. I'm very familiar with Wilshire, reputable firm. I think I can probably sum up some of the frustrations that we've heard here over the first couple of meetings, what I've heard from the community at large, and you can help address what might be the sentiment in Sacramento. Let's go back to, and I have many of them, so I'll just kind of rattle them off here. The first one is something that was alluded to just a few moments ago, but not just in divesting. We have no say in what CalPERS is investing in. We've let social, geopolitical, personal preference dictate investment opportunities, and therefore we have seen diminished returns through the PERS system, through the Great Recession and beyond. What is the sentiment that, since it's being controlled so much by Sacramento, that if there is a deficit of diminishing returns there, that instead of shifting the burden down to the municipalities, who's on the front lines, as you said, that loss, if it's not 7%, if it's 6.2, that 0.8% comes from the general fund, which we see all the rev measures being passed from Sacramento. The largest percentage of that goes to the state.
Yep.
What is the sentiment on letting that be a general budget line item for the state to cover that, to get PERS on an equal foundation? Has that been presented, and can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So the policy around having the state's general fund insure any deficit losses hasn't really been brought up. There have been, talks, and I don't even want to say as far as like anything by sources that are influential enough to make it happen, but there has been some sort of chatter about should there be a statewide, like maybe perhaps a statewide bond that could issue debt that would then allow local governments to borrow against, if at a very reasonable rate. But as far as shifting the debt, the liability, having it insured by the state, that has been wholeheartedly rejected. And here's the reason why. And this was actually quite a difficult I should say this is at least the rationale that I'm hearing. And it's quite a difficult conversation I had when I was at the League of Cities, and I had to, look at my elected officials on the board and say, one of the things that a dear friend of mine, frenemy of mine, the chief lobbyist for the California Professional Firefighters has said is that, look, these benefit enhancements that happened in 1999 were not a mandate. Every local municipality made the choice to take on these liabilities by switching these benefits. And while I can certainly say that's true, we also were given information from PERS that said that if we take on these retroactive benefit enhancements, that we may see perhaps a 4 or 5% increase in overall operational costs. That has certainly not been the case. In speaking directly to the governor when he came and spoke to the League of California Cities Board, we asked him a similar question in that vein. He said, the choices that were made by local governments, they have to be able to resolve those. However, we do want to try to provide more tools in the future. Very vague, but as far as the state, backfilling, it has not been something with any legs that's really gonna gravitate. I mean, something I would love to explore, but thus far there hasn't been the will to move in that direction.
The lack of will, has it been because there's been no concerted effort to bring it forward, or has it just been don't talk to us, it's political taboo? I mean, I'm just trying to get a landscape here to see where we're at, because the frustration that we've heard here is Sacramento is, in essence, through what's been going on for decades, has written a check and given us a bill for a credit card that now we have to pay. And it's kind of like, when you got into the hyper credit cards where you had bad credit and stuff, you went from a 3.9% credit card, oops, you're maxed out, now it's 35.3%. Right. And it kind of has that feel. And, so is there any traction to take something like that to Sacramento, to, if you got enough municipalities, the league may be behind it, to say, look, state, be the insurer behind this. We, quit letting other things interfere with the promise that was made all these years ago to the retirees to make sure that PERS and STIRS are sufficient, self-funding, and they're earning that 7%. If you impose things on it that cause us to make 5.8 or 6.2, well, guess what? State, you need to write that check.
Yeah, no, I agree. I would say that in order for that to even have a chance to be seriously discussed, you're not going to like my answer, but unfortunately, I would think that you would have to have things be a heck of a lot worse before they get better, by which I mean you're seeing multiple agencies go under and to where there is a municipal crisis happening to where all options are on the table. But as of now, because of sort of the veil of ignorance of, well, things are great, the state's doing fine, we've got revenue coming in, it's real, any real tangible options to address this have really not been much fodder, including your suggestion.
Right. So now under the current climate, we got a better chance of a snowball chance, down below than we do of getting that through the State House. I get it. The other question I have is through my connections with people at PERS, I know that under Governor Brown, there was talk about not going away from PERS, but making the employee contributions more like a 401k and requiring them to be required to put more into their PERS plan. And it kind of, the person I know was going around on behalf of the governor talking to different municipalities and everything else. And whatever happened with that, because it was like here for about 18 months and all of a sudden that person's travel stopped because it was no longer on the table and it seems to have disappeared. Has that morph? Is it still out there, or is it pretty much that ship sailed?
Yeah, I think that ship sailed. There's, Governor Brown at the time came out with a 12-point plan for pension reform, and got about, I think, maybe a little less than half of his plan in PEPRA. We have a new administration that I'll tell you has been very active in trying to at least understand the issues and really try to figure out what's going on. How are the employers going to afford this? I'll tell you, it's certainly going to be, again, telling what happens when things get worse. But as far as that type of specific policy, I haven't heard a whisper of that since
Brown.
Since Brown.
Okay.
Yeah.
My last question goes back to, and Robin, you can probably help me with this one. There was the recent legislation or decision from PERS to basically, if they go through the audit and they had screwed up, they could back charge us for their mistakes. We get back to accountability. And again, we have the feeling as a municipality, as a general public, that we're held hostage because, hey, they let you retire 10 years ago and said A, and somehow it was actually B, and now we get this huge bill. And our percentages go up and our, unfunded liability goes up. Where is our protection? Where's the protection of the residents of our city to, not be on the hook for the mistakes made at CalPERS and STRS, in this case, PERS, but they're one and the same, for mistakes they made? It sounds like the state as a whole has been willing to just give them a free pass to where, okay, you screwed up, but we'll collect it from someone else. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Sure. Actually, I have some good news on that front. The bill in question that you're referring to is Senate Bill 266. The bill, while it did pass the legislature, and was in this, and I wrote this interesting article on it for our firm to kind of share with folks. But what's interesting about this particular bill is that it went to enrolling and engrossing, which is sort of the waiting room before it goes to the governor for a signature, and the bill was then pulled back and held at the Senate, so it's dead this year. And so the bill that actually did not make it to the governor's desk for his signature or veto. It was a very unique circumstance by which that happened. I will tell you that while that particular policy did not become law, it will not be effective this next year. It is certainly something that the sponsors they brought back. They did it last year. It got vetoed by Brown. I think it was going to get vetoed again, and so instead of getting it vetoed again, they just pulled it back and said, let's figure this out, and they want to try that, but they're going to do it again next year. I mean, it's going to happen. So it's another fight that is going to have to happen. What the league's position, in my capacity, although I'm a contractor, I was representing the league specifically on that bill. What we pushed for was, let's ensure that CalPERS is correcting and fixing these mistakes before they happen, not just letting things happen and then during a random audit say, wait, never mind, there was a mistake made, now you owe us back all this money. Let's correct the problem on the front side. The sponsors unfortunately didn't agree to those amendments, their bill failed. But I hope that we can work collaboratively next year and try to find a way to fix it on the front side and not just kind of play the gamble that it may or may not get caught. And when it does, it's the retiree who suffers. And so I'd really like to catch those mistakes on the front side.
And I've got one more, and then I will hush and let everybody else. But it just happens to do with what I do for a living, and I know these sides. State of California, EDD, they've came together and they've started mandatory retirement plans in the private sector. Is there any linkage on the backside? Because that's the part that's missing. We see what's gone on with PERS and STIRS with the teachers. All of a sudden now they're coming down with, if you have X number of employees, you have to have a retirement plan. And oh, by the way, if you don't have one, we have one for you. Do you see any traction on the backside to where these could possibly be linked on the backside for that money to come in, like you said, with common law employees to help stabilize the plan? Or are they truly two separate issues? I'm trying to find out, are they running parallel on a collision course, or are they, totally separate?
Let me see if I'm understanding your question. Are you asking, because that will there be a day where we could, for example, have or under current law, or that there could be a time where an agency could, for new hires, enter into a different type of plan, like a defined contribution plan?
No. Me as a private employer,
Okay.
I have 30 employees, and I don't have a retirement plan. State now says I have to have a
secure
retirement
choice.
plan.
Yep.
My choice as a private sector. It just seems very strange that we've got the constraints on the one side with our pension plan, and now all of a sudden, out of the blue, the last couple of years, here comes this traction to where if you're a private employer and you do not have a retirement plan, we're going to make you have one.
Yes.
I'm looking to see, are they truly two separate lanes, or is there a collision course on the back end that they're looking, like you said, common law employees to help this fund grow, to help get more stable?
Okay, I see. Okay, yep, I'm with you. So Secure Choice was passed under Kevin De Leon. This was, I want to say, like in 2015, maybe 16? No, 14, something like that. Sorry. So it's the private sector retirement plan, so I'm a little rusty on it. But it was passed, and it was permissive. So long as you didn't have, if you had your own retirement plan, you didn't have to. From my understanding, the way that system is structured is that for Secure Choice, you have to enroll, but employees are not required to enroll. But if they enroll, you have to match. I don't see. People kind of joke around that I should have an office at PERS. I spend a lot of time over there, and I talk to a lot of people. And I have never once heard the linkage between Secure Choice and PERS. I mean, that's the best answer I can give you on that one. But I don't, and Secure Choice itself is not, it's a little rocky. You need to have folks in there. And I mean, it's an interesting type of system, but I have not heard any sort of even whispers of a linkage between Secure Choice and PERS. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Supposed to turn this on. My name is Phil Trainer. I've been here for the last 2 meetings, and I would thank you for coming, because you have enabled us to find out a few things that nobody seemed to know anything about.
Oh.
When you speak about TAP, I never heard of TAP before. Mm-hmm. I can't understand why some of the people at the city or the county didn't say, Trainer, this is TAP and this is what we can do with it. I tried one time phoning PERS, and the answer I got was, are you a member? And I said, no. Are you an employee of the county or the city? And I said, no, but we can't talk to you. Mm-hmm. So the public are outside looking in. Mm-hmm. To me, one of the things that I made a remark last time I was here, the last meeting we had here, first of all, what I would say is that you probably haven't gone to too many meetings at cities or counties that have been bringing up the issue of the pensions, have you?
Every single city I go to, we talk pensions. That's what.
Oh, I mean for the public.
Yeah, no, this is a first with the folks with the dais. I think it's great.
That's what I have said. These people are the first ones that have tried to do something.
Yeah.
The rest of them have done a damn good job of filling their pockets. One of the statements I made last month was that $250 million is owed by Sutter County and the city for the unfunded liability. Just for the unfunded liability, not for anything else. Now, you made a remark tonight about monies and all the rest. If you take that Sutter County with 100,000 population, we owe $250 million. The state has got approximately 40 million people. So the state probably on the whole owes about $100 billion for the unfunded liability to PERS. Am I close to being right?
It's about 147 billion,
Well, damn it. You know, I lost 47 billion for somebody. Anyway,
depending on the day, depending on the valuation of the fund, but it's about 147 billion.
now, what I would almost go home right now because you've made the remark on the TAP issue. Before I get into that, what I would say is that when you look out at the number of people that show up for these meetings, apathy prevails in this country. It serves us right for what's happening. That's my statement. Now I will say that you've done a hell of a good job. The one thing I'll say that we should look at in this county and city is that 1 out of every 8 people in this city and county are below the poverty level. And the federal government say the poverty level is $24,000 per family. Now, can you imagine a little county like this compared to San Francisco, and we have to pay the same percentages as everybody else does into pensions?
Yeah.
Why do we pay it in? Because our elected officials didn't take it upon themselves to say no, and the public didn't give a damn. Thank you very, very much for coming. You've enlightened me to no extent.
Yeah. Happy to be here.
I'd like to say something too. And a lot of people aren't going to take this right, and I'm not trying to insult you guys sitting back there. When I went to work for the state of California, Division of Highways at that time, I worked for an insurance company, and I was interviewed for a position, and I said, no, I won't take it. You're paying less than what I make. Well, guess what? They raised me 3 levels and called me that afternoon and said, we've got this job for you. They moved me from position to position. I flew down and voted against changing to unionization. And then unionization went in, and even your local people had no say-so in Sacramento. It's all union people that are hired and paid. When I got an injury and I couldn't work 6 hours, which was the requirement, when I couldn't work the 6 hours, my boss would not sign off to force me into retirement. I could work 5, but I couldn't work 6. And he waited until 2 days after the new pension went in. And I got almost a quarter more than what I would have gotten before. But what's happening in this particular community, the local people that don't work for the government don't make enough money to live. Yes, you have a business, you do. But there's a heck of a lot of people that don't make the money to live. And a lot of people say, oh, heavens, you're on retirement. Well, I think it's wrong. I think it's been wrong for years. And the unions now, the normal people that could go down and talk to the people that were elected, they're not allowed. No. It's high up union people, and we're paying them a heck of a lot of bucks because you're in it. You're forced in it, and I know it. So please think about how are we going to get our rights and our country back. no matter how much good work we do as government employees, we have to think about who we are really serving. And sorry, you can get, what's that word? It starts with a P at me, but I firmly believe this. And I really want the help for the people out here in the community. Thank you.
Elaine, I know that conversations we've had and listening to you speak before, there's a lot of past hurts and there's a lot of passion and some admirable things in you because you've talked about it not being fair, that you tried to do the right thing and whatnot. But what we're dealing with is things that's been done over that period of time, and that's how we've ended up here. But I want to address a couple of things. You're spot on with our median income here. And just to let you know, we had a workshop yesterday, and you went there. And one of the things that the council is also looking at is not just the PERS issue, but we've got to spur economic growth in this community. A lot of people ask a lot of times just from our community, I know we're divesting off of PERS real quick, but I just want to address the median income, is why we don't have so many amenities here and we're still sort of rural. And it's because we've got to drive up the median income in order to attract the businesses. So I just want you to know that the council is working on that because we'd like to move our median income up so that the residents here can make a fair living. And these guys back here and all 300 employees that we have at the city are top notch. I value every one of these guys, especially our first responders, because in a moment's crisis, just like you said, you don't have anything to get them. But I tell you right now, they're there. I've had these guys from Station 2 at my house at 1 o'clock in the morning, at 10 o'clock at night. At 1 o'clock in the morning, it was because a fire alarm went off at my house. But these guys showed up and took care of it. And at that moment, I'd have given my last dollar to protect my family. So kudos to you guys and kudos to the 300 employees we have here at the city.
Thank you for those comments, and I agree greatly. But I still think a lot. About 2 years ago, a woman that I had never met and didn't know at all called me crying because Southern California people bought the rental house she was in, the rental apartment she was in. She paid $600 a month rent, and they moved it to $1,100. We've got to change things so people can survive here. So that's just my concern about the community and the people.
Yeah.
Rick, we'll need to get you a microphone.
You worked for the League of Cities for 10 years?
I worked for the League of Cities for about 4 years.
Okay. To their credit, around 2002, they did put out a circular warning about the 3 at 50, letting cities know that they determined it really wasn't affordable, it was going to be bad news, and sadly not too many cities took their advice, but at least they were trying.
Yeah.
It seems like so often PERS likes to focus on the returns, the investments, the assets. But the liabilities, I think, are what's really been hurting us. They've gone up dramatically. And for most agencies, over the last 5 years, they've gone up 50%,
Yep.
10% a year. So do you think that PERS is concentrating enough on the great increase in liabilities? Or are they still focusing on their returns?
Well, what PERS will tell you, and I've pretty much got this one memorized because I'm with them all the time, is that there are 3 levers to a pension system. There is employer contributions, employee benefits, and oh gosh, I think that In-N-Out Burger's hitting me, and my brain's going. It's benefit design, it's employer contributions, and it's employee contributions. Those are the three things that are the levers in the system. We've maxed out on the. Okay, it's back. Here we go. Let's try this one more time. 3 levers: employer contributions, benefit design, and investment returns. There it is. Got it. So on the investment return side, they're laser focused on trying to maximize the returns because that's something that they believe is in their control. they take more of a passive role in the employer contributions. Like, look, the contributions are what the contributions are, and they say, well, we can't weigh in on benefit design. Now they very much weighed in on benefit design when they sponsored the bills that that made it through to Governor Gray Davis, but since then they have now moved to more of an apolitical position. I will tell you that they are now publicly saying things like, the benefits are as secure as the employer's ability to pay them. They are acknowledging that rates are skyrocketing and going up. They have yet to kind of go back into the world of benefit design. They're just staying out of the fray on that one. I have encouraged them to say, look, the only way we're going to get something done is if, you got local government, PERS, unions sitting together, trying to work out something that is going to ensure that we are providing quality services to the public, we have a balanced pension system, and that we can retain employees. But it's something that they have, again, I feel like Sacramento is a place that is reactive, not proactive. I used to use the sort of the analogy of, for years everyone talked about the Oroville Dam. How it was just, this thing that was just, we had this drought for 5 years where you could see the cracks in the wall, but it wasn't until the spillway breaks and people are getting evacuated out of their homes and they go, oh wait, we got a problem, we got to fix this, and all of a sudden the legislature jumped in and they're doing everything they can to fix the Oroville Dam before it just until we have another Katrina. I fear that until we're going to get there, it's going to be once the dam breaks and we start seeing these municipalities go under, and then they're going to say, oh wait, there's a problem, we've got to do something to fix it, and that's when PERS will come to the table. I'm hoping we can get there sooner, but that seems to be the trend that we deal with in Sacramento. It's very reactive, not very, very, very proactive.
I do think the California rule is part of it, isn't it? Where you can't prospectively change the formulas because of the California rule?
Yeah, but I would even say as recently as late last year with the recent ruling in the CAL FIRE case that would argue there's some they didn't touch core benefit design, but they did open up the door to a lot of other things. There's the Marin County case that's pending. There's the Alameda County case that's pending that may open some more doors. But look, this legislature hasn't been afraid to go to sort of pave the path and let the courts figure it out before. They just haven't with this particular issue. It seems to be something that they're now taking more of a passive role on as of now.
Is there anybody else that has any questions that needs the mic? I think that's it. Dane, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Appreciate it.
Sincerely
very much,
appreciate
Dane.
it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's way to go.
All right. Well, very informative. I think we all learned a lot. And Dan, from over here at myself and Councilman Shaw, we want to thank you for everything you've done today. I'm sure it put a lot of thought into it. To use Phil's words, you did a hell of a good job. So, all right. And Madeline, I know you're back there in the corner doing your thing, but we appreciate you coming too. Again, very informative. This is number 3. We'll meet for number 4. And Terrell, would you refresh my memory of the topic of?
So we will be having Robin and talking about the current actuary that we just received, and also we'll have a couple actuaries from CalPERS here to speak with us.
All right. So the moral of that story is let's be nice when they get here. They're probably it's just factual and they're the messengers, but it's I think it's a very relevant and important part of the discussion that we're here for. So unless anybody has anything, thank you very, very much for coming. It was especially nice to see our fire folks here. I appreciate you guys stopping by. Good thing you'd have to leave. So good night, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thought we were going to have another